All cues are valid in the right context and for the right person.
Right.
Just like a closet. We have a closet of outfits, but I can't wear my bikini to the funeral. But it's entirely appropriate to wear to the beach.
Right. Right.
But it would be wrong at the nude beach.
That's true.
So, like, cues are just like things that you're going to take out to wear. You have to find the right assortment of cues for your class, or if you're a student, the right assortment of cues for you.
For your body.
Cruising up to the real crucible.
It's like Grand Central Station. Everything's coming in and out of the
pelvis,
yeah.
groin, SI,
yeah, all of it.
Oof. We covered triangle in our twisting episode. Go back to basic twists, and we gave a nice overview of triangle pose and how this is a twisting standing pose that creates lots and lots of opportunity for the wrong thing to happen.
Right. And one of them is hip impingement. You can really put a strain on your SI joint. And so let's talk about that.
Yeah, the sheer logistics of it are enormous. A lot of the cueing is problematic. Here's where we get the stack the hips problem. That if the front hip can't abduct to 90 degrees, but we also want the hip to be stacked, so then we're getting a lot of compensatory movement here that's not helpful for that hip to try to do its job. The foot is fixed. Mm-hmm. So now the pelvis is going to do all sorts of wonky things to try to follow this cue of stacking the hips. And I think the narrower your hips are and the more naturally lax you are in your joints, you can get closer and closer to the stack. And I think if you can draw the upper thigh bones back and zip up with a lot of abdominal support and counter rotate your navel towards your front leg as you twist your chest to the ceiling, that can be a pretty safe way to get close to stacking the hips. But it's fairly advanced, subtle cueing.
And what Sarah was saying about getting the thigh bone back is really important, because if your knee is collapsing, so the hip joint is up in the top of the joint, you're just going to go into this really congested part of the hip. You can actually do some damage to the hip joint.
Right. So I think who's going to get into SI trouble here? It's going to be your more flexible student that easily leans their trunk over the front leg, and they've now been cued with a stiff person cue to shift their pelvis towards the back foot of the pose, which facilitates that hip flexion happening even more rapidly with no brakes. You're careening down a San Francisco hill with no brakes when you shift your pelvis towards the back of the leg and you're a flexible person.
And I think there is a tendency when you're trying to do that with your pelvis, especially if you have some flexibility, to do a little bit of a posterior tilt in the pelvis, which positions your femur bone even less advantageously.
I think that happens at the end when you try to stack the hip or when you twist. Then I think you get the front half of the pelvis deep into anterior tilt with hip flexion, and then you try to stack the hip, and then that top ilium, that top half of the pelvis, goes into that posterior tilt, and the sacrum just pops out. It says, like, I can't do that. It's like impossible for me to navigate. This little bone is only supposed to have a few degrees of movement, and it's navigating, taking the weight of your trunk from the spine
down to the
lands
legs.
into the sacrum, and then it has to be stabilized by two big bones, those two ilium, the ilia, that compact and hold the sacrum steady. And some of these poses start to take the pelvis apart, right? We're stretching the legs apart. The pelvis already is kind of unsnapping itself, like taking the leg off of the Barbie doll, like we used to do when we were young.
Yeah.
Right? It's pulling that apart, and then we're twisting it against each other and torquing it. And that's when the sacrum can't manage that much force coming from so many different directions, uneven hamstring lengths, complicating the picture, uneven spiral myofascial lines, complicating the picture, and a general lack of muscular engagement, all of the collapse that happens. So when we take a wide stance, instead of the pelvis coming apart, the wider our feet go, the more the hip bones
moves into the center.
Has to drive in that corn cobbing action.
Yeah. Yeah, because I love the seesaw. Everything's a seesaw. So if your knees are out wider, the head of the femur bone is going to be in narrower.
And this is an elusive feeling that I think a lot of flexible people miss and would highly enjoy, is feeling the head of the socket deep, deep in, penetrating the hip socket. It feels so steady and so secure and so aligned. And then you feel like, oh, I could do matrix-like things with my trunk,
Right.
because my hips are finally stable.
Very cool.
So how do we do that? You could turn the foot up and have the ball mount of the foot up on the wall like we did, and drive that foot into the wall and have the head of the femur be pushing
Driving
into the opposite hip bone. The problem is that if you're cueing shift your pelvis towards the back foot,
pulling
as
the
that
pelvis away.
femur drives in, it's pushing that hip out. We're only corn cobbing from one end
Right.
of the corn cob, not both. So as we drive that femur deep into the socket, the opposite hip bone has to provide resistance against it.
Which is not what you're doing when you're shifting your hips to the back.
Right. But this is such a valid cue for tight people, is to shift your pelvis towards the back foot. Like if you've got a bunch of really tight old men who've never done triangle pose and their hips are frozen, they're made of marble, you are going to be pushing those hips towards the back foot as strongly as you can to get any kind of hip flexion. The hip flexion's almost gone.
Right.
They're very much a lumbar flexion kind of presentation. All cues are valid in the right context and for the right person.
Right.
Just like a closet. We have a closet of outfits, but I can't wear my bikini to the funeral. But it's entirely appropriate to wear to the beach.
Right. Right.
But it would be wrong at the nude beach.
That's true.
So like cues are just like things that you're going to take out to wear. You have to find the right assortment of cues for your class, or if you're a student, the right assortment of cues for you.
For your body.
If your sacrum goes out in triangle pose and the teacher says triangle pose and you're really worried about it, don't shift your pelvis towards your back leg. In fact, I'd say shift it isometrically towards your front foot as you laterally tilt the pelvis. And I have to say, Jane, like, I have to backtrack to that episode where I was like so insistent that it's not a lateral rotation. When lateral rotation is a cue, that's all over the place for this.
Okay.
And you used in our social media the image of the hula hoop turning. It's like a big bus steering wheel turning. And this is a great way. This is what has to happen in the pelvis is the bottom ilium goes low as the top ilium for the back leg goes up.
Yeah.
And to get this rotation without the pelvis continually shifting towards the back foot for the flexible person is the challenge.
Yeah.
So you have this constant resistance pressing the pelvis towards the front foot as you encourage the rotation. And then a flexible person, instead of her having to move her front thigh back, well, we've acknowledged that that happens way too fast. So the bottom ilium is coming under really fast and the thigh bone's dropping precipitously.
Yeah.
You have to start to feel what movement's really easy for me. And I don't feel anything. I don't feel a stretch. It's always a good thing to pay attention to. If you don't feel a stretch, you need to be adding in and looking for strength. If you're in the final version of the pose and there's no stretch, you don't need to stretch whatever other people need to stretch. You need to be coming in and finding stability because you're already overstretched.
Yeah, I always like to say, some people get to experience the stretch way before others.
Way before.
Yeah.
And if you add that strength and stability back in, the flexible people might be pleasantly surprised by an appropriate mid-muscle, mild
They'll get some
stretch.
action.
They'll get some action.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I love that. Just even thinking about how we're trying to stabilize the pelvis so that it can do the lateral rotation or tilt.
And that kind of gets us to the two panes of glass.
Well, I'm not between two panes of glass, just right off the bat, right? If my pelvis is coming forward in the front plane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, exactly. You're no longer can be
Flat Stanley.
a plane of glass. You're no longer you're no longer a sheet of glass.
Yeah.
And if you rotate that pelvis forward, well, there's our second pane, and that's your back leg. And that sit bone lines up with the knee, lines up with the ankle, and you're maintaining Tadasana there.
Yeah.
And those panes of glass might be wide, far away from each other for someone who has anteverted hips and they don't have access to external rotation, but it could be really, really narrow and almost on the same plane or between two panes of glass that are like really close together.
Right.
For someone has femoral retroversion, their legs naturally turn out, and they're a man and they've got narrow hips and they can, then yes, this is why this cue existed and it came around.
Well, I think the cue was directional, not specific.
Oh, not literal.
Yeah.
Yes. Tell me more.
Well, because it's like to open up the pelvis is so challenging that the idea of coming in between two planes is going to cause you to sort of open up more than closing down, where you get that forward fold.
Yeah, but then flexible women took it literally and overachieved and fried their groins up.
Right. So if you think about who's making the cues up, where it starts, right?
Right.
That makes sense.
And it comes from a stiffer place.
Yeah.
Right. There's a sheer difference in body types and everything. These are realities. People need different cues.
Right. So, we don't need that right now.
So how do we know if we're feeling it in the wrong place? Where are the wrong places to feel sensation in triangle pose?
Definitely your hips, your knees, your
Get more
ankles.
specific about the hips.
Oh, well, for me, this is a pose that I don't like if it feels compressed or just dumpy, right? You know how you rest your forearm on side angle and you take the other arm overhead? Sometimes it feels like in triangle, like I'm resting my torso on the hip joint.
Oh my God.
And I don't want that. So often I'll just try to pull my ribs up away from the pelvis, right? And then start to rotate the pelvis from there, right? Like I want it to be set in the joint so that I turn it and I don't drop the pelvis down on the thigh, right? Which happens because, first of all, our core's heavy. Sometimes I don't want to hold it up. I don't want to take the underside of the core and hold it up because I need the underside of the core to be lifting me up to keep me from collapsing down on that joint.
Yeah, and I think the back leg is a big help there, feeling that anytime the legs widen and we're going with hip abduction away from the midline is the feeling that you're straddling a barrel or you're riding a really fat horse. And so there's this sense of the thighs bursting out. And if your back thigh is falling in with you, taking a strap, taking a hand, getting the back thigh to widen is a nice way to stop dumping.
Yeah.
Because that hip, if it's in abduction, that back leg is trying to lift off the floor, which it will do once you take triangle to half moon.
Yeah. I like to do that too. Is we'll go to reverse triangle, right? I often will have the back leg like bend, pressing the foot, bend the back leg, bend the back leg. Find the grounding in the back leg and then keep that as you try to lengthen the torso forward and come into triangle pose.
What a great opportunity to shift the pelvis towards the front foot too for flexible students. Yeah. Don't let your pelvis make a huge movement now. It's just like when you were turning that hula hoop in the Instagram post. It's like it's staying here. The wheel that you're turning, the steering wheel isn't moving from the passenger side to the driver's side. It's staying right in front of you. You're trying to resist this big shift sideways.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because another way that it could feel less dumpy is obviously getting the underside of the core really long and supported, the back legs engaged. But I'm just thinking too, if that front leg is really anchored in the pelvis, it's going to have a better sense of movement without collapsing down. There's just so much opportunity to collapse in this pose.
I just did a variation the other day for this, and I've never felt it more clearly. It's basically Hasta Padangusthasana B. So you're standing on one leg, which represents the back leg in triangle, and then you take your top leg to a chair.
Oh.
On top of the seat of a chair.
Okay.
So that way you're not holding the leg up because then you've got all the balance stuff and it's too much. You can push the heel of the front foot into the seat of the chair, not down into the seat of the chair, but into the front lip of the seat of the chair.
Yeah.
Skillfully so as to not collapse or close the chair, and the chair is braced against a wall. But there's like a 2-inch front lip of the seat of that chair.
Right.
You can drive your heel into that, and it gives that direct feedback. That femur, when it's parallel to the floor, is driven straight into the socket. The standing hip pushes back, and then you lean over the front leg, and you can get into basically a full version of triangle pose. And never have I ever felt more outer hip in than doing the pose that way.
Cool.
Yeah, it's my new favorite way to do the pose.
I'll have to give it a shot. The side bend We've been talking about all this stuff.
Yeah. So in gate pose, we talked about side bend versus keeping the side body long.
Right.
And most people will say that triangle is you're trying to keep that underside long.
Right.
It's not perfectly, strictly, textbook, immaculately straight, but you're reducing the side bend because the side bend is just, it's more of a fault at that point, right? Like some of these things like a lateral tilt in the pelvis can be a fault. We want to be able to access this motion, but then we don't want to get stuck in it.
Right.
We want to be able to side bend the lumbar spine, but we certainly don't want to hang the weight of the torso on a side bent lumbar spine. Right. And people who tend to side bend too much in their lumbar spine, they're going to feel so much sensation in their waist. They're like, oh, it's so much in my waist. You're not using your glutes.
Yeah.
You know, you're not actually, and you're not lengthening the underside body. So again, like where should you feel it? I would say you want to feel a sense of tone in the waist, top waist, not so much of a super big stretch.
No, I think the core is activated and elongated, but it's not stretched.
It's holding the trunk up with the glutes. It has to be with the glutes.
Yeah. Supporting
the weight of the trunk from collapsing into the front hip joint.
And so all this comes back to doing the pose, not to its fullest expression. You know, starting these poses in small expressions so that you can have the integrity in the pose. Like, oh, I'm just coming into a little bit. I feel like I can have the underside of the core supporting me come out and then just keep moving into it. You know, I won't do it in my vinyasa classes that way, but I might do it in my own privates or my own body, because there's going to be a point in time where my core doesn't have what it needs to really keep it buoyant, so to speak. And I'm going to dump into the hip. Yeah.
So no sensation in the groin, no sensation in the SI joints, no strong sensation in the lumbar spine at all. You shouldn't be feeling a pose in your low back.
No. If you feel in your low back, you're using your low back. We don't want to be doing that.
Right. You're so good at that. If you're feeling in your low back, you're using your low back.
Yeah.
Which is not.
Don't do that.
Not the primary stabilizer. Yeah. Right. So then when we get up into the trunk, we see two different strategies. We see the back bendy types that back bend to twist open and pop the ribs open.
Yep.
And they're probably stacking their hips unintentionally when they do that. And the core is getting way too long.
Yeah.
And then we have the lumbar flexion types with their abdominals are way too short and they round forward into the pose and they can't twist at all.
Right.
Even using blocks, their chests are turned towards the floor.
Right. Right. So what would you do? I mean, with those people, I'd want to almost like, fine, you know, let your chest turn towards the floor. And then I would want to take the arm and sort of pull it up like I'm doing a tricep curl and then just open the ribs, like in and out, open the ribs, open the ribs, open the ribs. And then as I can get that rib opening as much as I can, then go into the pose.
Yeah, I think for both the flexible and the stiff student, I would say back out.
Yeah.
Because the flexible person's gone into this expressive, which feels very nice for this moment, kind of back bend twist. And the tighter person has maybe humbly used the blocks, but still can't find any access to a rotation because the abdominals are locked so short.
Yeah.
So if they back out, one of the things we said was we get the twist in neutral spine.
Yeah.
So you could do this in a warrior 2. Twist your ribs towards the back leg, which is part of the pose, as the pelvis stays twisting slightly towards the front leg, and look over your back hand. And then you straighten the front leg and reverse your triangle. And then you've already got your twist. And as soon as you feel yourself coming out of the twist, you know, turning your head, turning your chest, that's your stopping point.
Right.
Just
right.
Put a hand anywhere it lands on your legs and hand and leg push into each other.
The other easy way for the people who are really mobile and find that back bend is once you take them into half moon, they're screwed. You know, because it's like their leg goes behind their core and their arm goes behind their core and their center of gravity is lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you want to be able to see your toes when you're up there.
Yeah. It's like if you're using if you're back bending, you're not using your front body enough.
Yeah.
And if you're rounding, you're using your front body too much and not enough back strength.
Yeah.
You can do triangle from a wide-legged forward fold, turn one leg out, but you keep downward dog arms stretching out long and you deepen the groins for everyone, get everyone to release their hips back and then walk the hands to the front legs. You're coming in, it's paradoxical. You're coming in the deepest way.
Right.
Right. One of the other ways that you can address the stiff versus flexible student is understand that the flexible student has that wide splayed rib cage and their pelvis is tilting forward. So those abdominals are just very, very long. And just using a breath cue of shushing or blowing through pursed lips for them so they can start to narrow their ribs and zip up and contain that anterior tilt. And then for the stiff students, I would say just a relaxed, easy exhale. You are just focusing on inhales, expansion, and creating space. And that way you can just teach whatever cues you want, but you've got the people who need some shoring up, recruiting their abdominals, their pelvic floor. Whereas if you do that with the tight student, they're just layering tightness and tension on top of already hypertonic, short, restricted muscles.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to think of the contents of the core as that energy source, that force, that power source, hara. And if your ribs are open and your pelvis is open, the energy is leaking out.
Yeah.
It is not contained. You are not going to be able to access it for power and strength and stability.
Okay, so if that takes us through a lot of the trunk complaints and how to access the core and how to use the breath, helping people get sufficient twist often is just having them back out of the pose, like we said, get it a little sooner with a neutral spine, then come in. Mm-hmm. And this is where those myofascial lines may or may not be helpful. It's really helpful if you have a visual for your students to show the double helix of the spiral line as it moves through the body. So what does this mean? It means that muscles don't work individually. They work in long chains that wrap around the body. And so what the arch of the foot is doing is connected to the hip, which is connected to the trunk rotation, which is connected to the neck.
Right. We kind of get into tensegrity then.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating because if I've got a pull on one place, it's going to reverberate all the way through and I might have pain and sensation in a completely different location than where the restriction initiates, right?
Yeah. So if you can't turn the head, we've said you're not turning your thoracic sufficiently.
Definitely, I think the thoracic spine hasn't rotated sufficiently, but we have to remember that the cervical spine is the spine. For some reason, it's like once you get to the top of the shoulders, it's completely disconnected. So keep it in the same alignment. You want your skull to be oriented in a way that it can rotate to its maximum effect. So if my head is forward of my chest, I'm not going to be able to get a good rotation.
Yeah, so we talked about cervical rotation in our basic twist episode, and we've talked about tractioning the back of the neck using a cupped hand, the base of the skull, to draw the throat back, lengthen the back of the neck, and then direct that twist, that rotation to be happening at C1, C2. And I was thinking about your fractured vertebrae, and if 70 to 80% of that rotation is happening at C1, C2, it might not matter at all if you fractured a vertebrae lower than that.
Yeah.
And that's why you still have access to rotation even with substantial injury to the neck. But so what we're saying here is if we're turning from the top of the cervical spine, the neck spine, not the bottom, we need to elongate.
Yeah,
and connect that all the way down to that tailbone, tip over in the pose where we're keeping that spine pretty straight.
Yeah.
Pretty parallel to the floor, and use the hand to manually turn the head to look towards the ceiling. So you're resting the weight of the very heavy head.
Right.
And you're lengthening the back of the neck, and you're steering the rotation to happen from the top of the cervical spine, which can give people a nice way to find this in triangles. If your right leg is the front leg, your right hand is in that position, you lengthen that elbow out, and then you lengthen the back of the neck and you turn the head to the ceiling, and then you're just holding your head like this, and you're looking up towards the ceiling when you're in the fullest part of the pose. That palm is up, cupping the back of the skull.
And I'll even practice it. Take your fingers, sweep them up the neck, get under the occipital bone, and just, lift up, set the jaw back in space. And then as I'm sweeping my skull to the right, I'll take my hand to the chin and turn it. Because what happens often, because of restrictions, people will tuck their chin or lift their chin. They'll somehow not keep the head neutral as they're spinning it around. And that, then you get into places where it doesn't feel good.
Right.
It's interesting to see, how do you cue people to move their skull back in space without lifting it or tucking it.
Yeah. I have everyone bring their head forward, because the people who don't need to bring their head back and certainly don't need to slide their jaw back because their cervical spine is too flattened.
Right.
For them, you want to be lifting the chin and restoring that curve. But if everyone brings their head too far forward and then you just take your fingers gently to your throat and guide the throat back. So you're just guiding the neck itself back.
It's
And
really
then,
like if a big mama cat came and grabbed you right at the nape of the neck and lifted you up. But we just want to be aligned so you can rotate the skull and adjust your gaze without pain.
And why would we want to look up?
Why would we want to look up? Well, I think you want to look up because I want to keep that rotation ability in my neck lubed up.
Yeah, I think it's just for balance. I would guess that the primary reason to look up is to then make the pose harder.
Yes, definitely harder. Because I was thinking that one, if you look down, it's more grounding. So if you rotate, that's an additional challenge. Yeah.
Triangle pose is a great foundational pose to start training yourself how to move your head.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're going to have to do this in our more advanced pose series. You will be tracking your head and trying to maintain your balance. And so you want to practice in a more steady pose. And triangle is your first opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Side angle pose, you're so low to the ground. You've got your knee bent. It's just a lot easier.
Yeah. Base of gravity is closer to the ground. Yeah. And that's one of the huge parts of the vestibular system is your gaze, your eyes, what you're looking at. And being able to move your head and sustain your balance is really healthy. It's really good practice for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel somewhat sad about coming to the end of triangle. What are your 3 takeaways for this pose?
The one takeaway is that this pose is active, it's integrated, your core is really showing up to do the game. And then you're going to do a little bit of modifications. You're going to twist a little bit. You're going to rotate the pelvis, but that you should be able to come up, not lean on a block. You don't need to lean on a block. You don't need to come to half moon and lean on a block because this is all about the integrity in the core and the limbs moving out from there. You keep it on that like a shish kebab. You want the core to really have a lot of integrity in it, and then everything else can kind of spin around. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that.
Nice.
Yeah. I guess my big takeaways are whether or not students need to shift their pelvis towards their front leg or towards their back leg. Since this is a very common thing that students really latch onto, helping a student understand if they should do it or not. And then I would say that my other big takeaway from this is use props to create these strange internal feelings that we want people to cultivate. We've felt them.
Right.
We can say, I want you to feel this energetic move inwards of support driving in from the hips. And that's like we're speaking in tongues to average people. So setting up poses with the wall, the props, yes, sometimes those chairs to really drive home. Oh, that's feeling.
What it feels like.
And I'm going to remember that feeling for the rest of my life.
Yeah. 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 Because this is a kind of body awareness that most people don't show up to class with. And that's why this practice is so beautiful, is because you can get this really intimate awareness in your body, mind, spirit, where you can find the subtle work, where you can really affect your system so that it can continue to show up and do amazing things. So it's very cool. Yeah.
And my third thing would be start to understand whether or not you're a wide rib caged, wide ISA person with a pelvis that tends to spill forward, or if you're a narrow ISA, tight rib cage person with a tendency to tuck. If you are the former, you need to work on shushing exhales, pursed lips exhales, and that's going to get your core and your breath helping you no matter what shapes or cues you do.
Right.
And then if you're that stiffer person, you really need to let those inhales come in. You need to find some ease in the pose, reduce the tension. You don't need to bring in all this strength. Allow things to happen with time and patience, not efforting and ego.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. I already know which one I am. Rib splay, pelvis spilling pandas.
I love those pandas. I'm a combination of both. And I think many teachers are that way. We've actually done a lot of correcting in our bodies. So we walk the razor's edge of awareness of like, sometimes I'm a lumbar flexion person. Sometimes I'm a lumbar extension. Sometimes I have too much rigidity and I can't allow.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm so loose, I'm just collapsing and spilling everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have to show up not with a formula, but with attending to what is happening today.
Yep. And that's really why it's such a great practice. We're just showing up to see what's there today.
Right. It's the same template, but we have to keep coming at it fresh.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Yeah. Beginner's mind.
Beginner's mind.
Okay. So keep doing your practice because this is how we keep showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thanks, Jane.
Namaste.